Welcome back, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Our next panel discussion is focusing on ESG, obviously very topical, so very much looking forward to this discussion. And I'm delighted to introduce Jen Halvis with CityView, who's going to be facilitating this discussion. Thanks, Jen.
Thanks. So really excited to have everyone here with us today. Obviously, ESG is a very hot topic and on the forefront of everyone's minds, investors, and others in the industry. So excited to have this great panel with us. So we'll just dive in and let me introduce everyone. So Jen Halvis, I'm from CityView. We're a real estate investment and development firm based in Century City. And we're vertically integrated, so we do everything from acquisitions through development, construction management, asset management, property management. So that's sort of the lens from which I look through the ESG framework. And then with us, we have Jeremy Keel. He's managing partner and co-founder of Catalyst Opportunity Funds based in Salt Lake City. Catalyst focuses on transformative community development through opportunity zone investing with a focus in high-growth secondary U.S. markets. Prior to Catalyst, Jeremy was president and CEO of the Sorensen Impact Center, a university-based think tank focused on impact investing, social finance, and public and private partnerships, among other things. He served as a senior advisor to the mayor of Salt Lake City for a stint and is a recovering lawyer following his NYU education. He started his career at Clary Gottlieb and Latham & Watkins. So excited to have you.
Thank you.
Also with us is Michelle Winters. She's VP of Solutions at Gobi, the ESG platform by Conservice, a consulting software services provider in the real estate and private equity areas. And they assist companies in creating, monitoring, and reporting on their ESG initiatives. Conservice, which recently acquired Gobi within the last 6 months, is the leading utility management platform in property management. And prior to Gobi, she was the senior sustainability consultant at Epstein, supporting lead projects globally, including extensively throughout Europe. Thank you. And then also with us, we have Colleen Danaher. She's the regional VP of development in the Western US for JTC Americas. JTC is a leader in third-party specialty fund administration with a variety of solutions, including an impact fund and ESG. She specializes in opportunity zones, private equity, 1031 tax-deferred exchanges, and EB5 transactions, and she has over 20 years of experience in the financial services industry. And then also with us, Lisa Davis. She's the executive director and portfolio manager at PGIM Real Estate, specializing in impact investing. She's based in New York. She's responsible for developing and leading PGIM Real Estate's impact investing strategy, including creating their new impact fund. She was director of investor relations and specialty originations at Pembroke Capital Management for PGIM, where she raised capital from institutional investors for commercial real estate investment, primarily focused in affordable housing and community development. Before joining PGIM, Lisa spent 6 years with the Ford Foundation, making grant investments in affordable housing and community development, and spent 12 years prior to that doing real estate development in Boston. She has a Master of City Planning from MIT and serves on the board of the Brooklyn Navy Yard and Impact Brooklyn. And last but not least, Lisa Merage. She's the managing partner and chief impact officer of Revitate and RevOZ Capital. Revitate is an alternative investment platform built on the legacy of the RAJ Capital family office, which was established after the successful sale of their family swimwear business, RAJ Swim. Prior to Revitate, Lisa served as the CEO of RAJ Swim from 2006-2016, and she's the co-owner of the Sacramento Kings, Golden One Center, the Sawyer Hotel and Residences, and is a developer of the Downtown Commons Entertainment and Sports District in Sacramento. She serves on a number of boards for philanthropic organizations, is a graduate of the USC Marshall School of Business, and holds a certificate of social impact strategy from the University of Pennsylvania. So as you can see, we have a really distinguished panel that has a lot of knowledge about ESG, both from a provider side and from a company side that have gone through the evolution of developing their ESG platforms. So, want to dive in and understand how their ESG evolutions have taken place. One of the things in ESG, I think, is that people come at it from a lot of different areas and think about it a little bit differently. So I think it'd be helpful if we just start out making sure that we kind of all norm on what some of these terms mean and what it means as they flow through each of these companies. So maybe Michelle, do you want to just give us a quick snippet on ESG and how you look at it and what it means to you?
Yeah, absolutely. So for better or for worse, I think ESG encompasses a lot. We've heard it used, I think, throughout the sessions, which is actually kind of fantastic that it's, although we have a great panel today talking about it, it is really incorporated in almost every aspect of a business. And so if we break it down, though, into the 3 pillars, I do think it's good to maybe identify it for real estate, for private equity, and kind of what we're thinking about. So on the E side, we're actually pretty well defined on what we're thinking about as it relates to the E. We want to think about data metrics, right? Data transparency. And in real estate, we're fortunate in that the E is usually, in the built environment, what we're consuming. So it's your energy consumption, your water consumption, waste, and GHG impacts. So it's the greenhouse gas emissions, your carbon footprint. We've kind of defined that on the environmental side. And what's been great to see within the E as well is how it impacts kind of every stage of a potential deal, from acquisition to investments to operations. So it's pretty fairly well established. The social side actually, I think, is kind of the more difficult one to define within real estate. We haven't really gotten to a good place yet on what metrics exactly we want to be thinking about. However, the idea of the social side is really the way that you as a company engage with your stakeholders. So stakeholders being your employees, your tenants, your clients, your investors. A lot of ways that we look at that is things at diversity and inclusion. As an example, it's going to be your community engagement activities. There's a lot of overlap with that as it relates to impact investing that we'll be talking about as well. Other areas, gender pay gap. So these are certain metrics you can start thinking about. Some other more numeric-based views into social, and then governance. So that's more from a regulatory standpoint, right? More the ethical kind of corporate activities that are taking place. That's just innate to good business practices, but part of ESG is really documenting it, tracking it. There's a lot more regulations coming kind of down the pipe, especially in commercial real estate. And then sometimes I'll even throw cybersecurity under governance, which I think is becoming more and more prominent as well. So it's a very long-winded answer, not short by any means, sorry, but there's a lot that really gets pulled into there. And so I think it's good to start thinking about specifics. I think it can get so broad, but it comes down to those, transparency, and those are just some examples.
Yeah, I think that's really helpful. And then you mentioned impact investing. So Lisa, where do you see the intersection between ESG and impact investing?
Yeah, thank you. And I'm sure that we're going to confuse the Lisas here
Sorry.
at the end. I'm here both talking to me, so answer. At PGIM Real Estate, we've had a ESG program at the firm for over a decade, and ESG is a part of everything that we do in terms of investment decisions and how we manage assets. And impact is different. It's a more specific subset of ESG. So impact, we like to say, is when you have a dual mandate for investing to achieve financial performance, but also achieve a specific social or environmental goal. And in our case, we're focused on a specific social goal, which is to address inequality through the provision of affordable housing and community revitalization. So it really is more proactive, where you're seeking to accomplish not just a financial investment objective, but also a social or environmental investment objective.
And so speaking of investments, and as you're looking at investments, how do you flow ESG through your investment decision-making process? I think that touches a lot of people are looking at that. So maybe Jeremy, if you want to kick us off and let us know how you think about that as you flow it through your process.
Yeah, sorry, I was a little loud. I think that sort of similar to what Lisa was mentioning with Catalyst, like everything that we do is really with a view towards impact, and that's just sort of in the DNA of the firm. That's why we started the firm. That was kind of a clear-eyed, focus for us from the beginning. So as part of that, we really wanted to be intentional about kind of the impact underwriting, which I think is the question, like how do we sort of assess opportunities based on social or environmental impacts. So we really wanted to kind of create a framework that we thought would be best in class. There's nothing really off the shelf out there, at least that we could find, that we were able to just sort of rely on. So we kind of created something that was pretty much from scratch. And really what it comes down to, for us at least, is doing a little bit of a, so we're a private equity firm. We work with developers. We capitalize developers basically in our target markets. And we take a kind of a snapshot in time, what we call a community needs assessment, which is sort of a data-driven exercise to understand what that community looks like that we're trying to invest into from a socioeconomic status perspective, race, ethnic, characteristics, level of educational attainment, healthcare outcomes, things like that. Really try to understand what that community looks like, and then sort of the second piece of the analysis is to really do a pretty robust, what we call impact underwriting or impact scorecard analysis, which I think a lot of groups will do, but it's very difficult to make that an objective kind of formulaic exercise, and I think that's where we've really kind of focused on spending our time, so that if Jen scores a project and I score a project independently, we want to get to the same score. And I think we've been able to do that with the scorecard that we've created, and really what it's trying to do across seven different categories and about 50 different subcategories, very formulaically understand how the project that we're underwriting and looking at in this community is addressing the identified needs that came out in the community needs assessment. That to us is the sort of holy grail in this, is really understanding whether this project is going to address needs of the community. I'll give you a good example, like a food desert project. People talk a lot about food deserts. If we've identified a sub-market in the market that we're investing in as a food desert, and a developer comes to us with a concept for maybe a multifamily project, but co-op grocery on the main floor, on the ground floor, that's going to score really highly on our kind of impact measurement or impact scorecard. And then the third piece of our sort of framework or analysis is post-investment. Once we've actually closed on the asset, we have investors that are with us for the long haul. We're a 10-year fund, and so that's a long stretch of time. We really want to see how our investments are moving the needle in that community over time. So we settle on a set of metrics effectively with our developer partners that they're going to be held accountable for, that we're going to be held accountable for, and then we do kind of dashboard style, impact reporting, readout in real time for our investors, so they kind of get a sense, and the community, so they get a sense of kind of what's happening in that neighborhood. And then we take it one step further. We actually condition a portion of our asset management payments to our developer partners based on their performance relative to those metrics, and that's built into the asset management agreements that we have with our developer partners. So we're really trying to be robust from the minute that we identify a neighborhood that we want to invest in, all the way through the investment process to the asset management and beyond. That's kind of how we've approached it.
And then Lisa Merage, maybe you could touch on how you guys have tackled ESG through your investment process.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Some similarities to what Jeremy is working on with regard to looking at community needs, and also we have put together our own scorecard as well. The other thing that we've done at Rivaz Capital, which is our Opportunity Zone Fund, is we put together a social impact council. And with Opportunity Zones, it was interesting because a lot of funds weren't talking about ESG, and that was in effect why we went into that segment. So through this council, we are kind of sharing what the best we think of ESG is in a council forum. We're innovative, we're multidisciplinary, we're bipartisan, we're diverse. We have a group that includes Mick Cornett, the former mayor of Oklahoma City, who's a Republican. We have Stephanie Rawlings Blake, who's a Democrat and former mayor of Baltimore. We have some thought leaders in the space, like Rachel Riley and Brett Theodos, who's from the Urban Institute, and also an ex-NFL player and an ex-NBA player who works in the commercial real estate space now, but grew up in Compton. So we have really come up with diverse ideas that we run through this council as well.
And then maybe Lisa Davis, do you want to just touch on that too? I know your specific focus is an impact fund, but ESG really does flow through PGIM real estate broadly. How do you all as an organization look at ESG when you're looking at either doing any investments directly or as you pick developer partners or partners?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting to hear about the impact things that characteristics that you all are looking for. We do a very similar thing on our impact fund. The layer that I want to add on the impact piece is also it's important to get feedback from the people that you are having an impact on. So we add to kind of our own proprietary framework and our Impact Advisory Council a resident survey that seeks to get feedback on 5 different social variables that we are focused on. But that's on the impact fund. I think you're asking me more broadly about ESG at the firm. And I think one of the opportunities in real estate for ESG is not just on how do you select investments for ESG, but how do you manage them to achieve ESG objectives. So that's a big piece of what we're focused on. When we diligence an investment, we have extensive ESG checklists and due diligence that's part of the underwriting and the investment committee memo. And then that information informs how we develop or manage the asset over time. And one of the areas that I think has become really important for this is climate resiliency. So when we make an investment, when we're diligencing an investment, we rate each investment for 7 different climate risks using some data from a company called 427. And then we look at the outcomes of that risk assessment, and our investment and asset management plan then is responsive to those climate assessments. Doesn't mean that if there's a red, we don't make the investment. Otherwise, we wouldn't be making any investments in Florida or Arizona, and that's obviously not the case, or probably Southern California either. But it means that we are taking those climate risks into consideration when we make the business plan for those investments.
And a lot of that in the E space is risk mitigation, right? So what are some of the types of things, if you see an investment that does score lower in some of these categories, whether it's climate or others, then how do you respond to that, not just not doing the investment? How do you mitigate that?
Yeah, I mean, if it's a development deal that we're investing in and there is a high wildfire risk or water stress risk, there are certain things that we do in the physical development to mitigate that in terms of like plantings away from the buildings and water conservation issues. And then we also have started to try and figure out how to assess the regional risk. Like, what is the risk associated with the utility grid? Anyone that has investments in Texas in the last year understands that you have to not just look at what's happening on your property, you have to look at also what are the systemic risks and what are the tools that are available to us as the property owner to be able to address some of those.
And if I can add to that too, I think it just shows Texas, everything that happened, the risk mitigation is there for a reason and has actual financial performance alignment, right? So yes, you put good things in place for that day that you hope never happens, but give Texas as the example, how much money was lost because of everything that kind of occurred and what wasn't in place more successfully. So anyways, that was just the other comment that I thought was important to note, because I get a lot often from different individuals that are like, why do I need to do this? Like, yes, I know this is what I should be doing, but why? At the end of the day, there is that good performance alignment you can go back to. So I thought that was a good example of.
Yeah, I mean, it's challenging, right? Because with regards to climate risk, you know that hurricane season is getting worse.
Yeah.
You don't know where the next hurricane is going to hit. And we are still in an environment with regards to climate change risk where the risk is not priced into the assets, by and large. Even long-term assets like mortgages are not appropriately pricing climate risk into the structure. And so there's always a question of, like, if I don't make this investment or if I make this capital improvement and the worst thing doesn't happen, have I wasted my money? I think in the real estate industry, we are at a nexus where that's about to change. Mm-hmm. Right? 1/3 of people in the world have experienced an adverse climate risk this year, right? So this is no longer, I don't know if we can afford to, harden our building against wildfires. I don't know if we can afford to put solar on the roof. We are at a point in the next few years where we're not going to be able to afford not to have a double negative there, but it's going to become, especially for institutional asset classes that expect to have liquidity at the back end, your liquidity is going to be impaired if you don't address the climate risk.
And it was mentioned sort of measuring data, right? I think that's a really critical piece of this is understanding, setting goals and understanding how to measure and reach those goals. And so how are you guys all setting those goals? And maybe, Michelle, if you want to touch on, how are you helping your clients set goals and then measure against those goals?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it's first really important to define your goals. And I think we sometimes get in a situation of, oh, I see this person over here doing this. I see this person over here doing this. My investor just sent me a 100-page questionnaire. What do I focus on? So I do think there's an element of first defining what it is that you're looking for. We can definitely talk about that a little bit further, but that to me is step one. We specifically have seen an increase in looking at materiality assessments as a way to be able to do that effectively, which is ultimately a deep dive, looking at stakeholders, looking at your peers, looking at these third-party frameworks to put together what metrics do we want to be focusing on and what story do we want to tell successfully and how do we want to measure our performance. So I think that's really crucial to a good ESG related initiative is define your metrics first. I'm biased, so we're a tool and a company to help clients actually do all of that and measure that. So a software tool, whether it's ours or someone else's, so you can look at year-over-year performance, so you can kind of hone in on where to focus your efforts, I think is really valuable. And I think real estate, again, has gotten to that as more of a standard for the E side, right? We're looking at utility bill data, it's that energy, water, and waste, converting that to GHG. Now we're moving more towards net zero targets, and how do we do that effectively? And in order to do that effectively, you have to track your progress. But social and governance metrics is the one I'm super excited about. I think we need to get to a place of actually putting numbers out there, being transparent with it, running correlations with it, and tools are really a great way to do that, in my opinion, one that you can have easy access to.
Lisa Davis, at PGIM, you guys have set a goal to get to net zero by 2050. Maybe you could talk about a little how you set that goal, and then if you have any goals that you've set around the S and the G that you could maybe talk about as well, because I do think the E is a little bit easier, at least to understand what a goal might be, and the S and the G are a little bit squishier, and we're just starting to really set some metrics around defining those as an industry.
Yeah. We set a net zero by 2050 goal last year. It was set at the very highest levels for the company as a whole, and we are now in the process of filtering that down to a net zero plan at the asset level for each asset. And it's really hard to imagine how we're going to get to net zero. I think with energy and water efficiencies and different ways, different building techniques, we might get to net 80%. I think there's going to have to be some broader scale changes to get to net zero. Certainly renewable energy credits will be a part of that, but the process has been, it was set as a target, and then we have to take it down to the asset level, and we need that asset level data and the year-over-year improvement to really be able to do that. On the S side, as a company, I think probably the biggest focus in the last year and a half has been on DEI. And we publish our DEI statistics annually. We do gender pay gap analysis. And in the last year and a half, we've moved to really formalize the framework around DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, so that it again is permeated through all of our business. We really see it as a business imperative, as a competitive advantage. So it is focused not just on talent, but also the impact of our investments, how we engage with communities, and our corporate culture.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've probably all seen in the DEI space. I think there's been a lot of talk for many years about focus on it and caring about it, but at CityView we have investors, pension funds, insurance companies, hedge funds, high net worths, and now we're starting to see every single group asking about it, and it's starting to be a lot more than just lip service. We're getting questionnaires where people are actually caring and focusing on it and measuring it and making their investment decisions based on that. And so I think that's been a shift over the last 5 years, and I think that's only going to continue to be at the forefront of investors' minds. So, building out those programs and then tracking and measuring them, I think is becoming even more and more critical for the success of all of us in the real estate industry.
Yeah, I mean, I think when the data came out that showed that diverse decision-making bodies make better investment decisions, investors really started to pay attention.
I think that's right. And are putting their money behind it too, right? They're making investment decisions and choosing managers and partners based on those in part. And so that's been a real shift in, I think, their mindset, which has been permeated down through all the rest of us.
I was just going to add, I just like part of the aspect is, again, sharing the results, right? Like we really want to gain access to this information so we can see that progress, so we can create trends, so that we can decide what happens next. And so I just think the transparency piece, again, the environmental has been kind of moving in that direction for a while, but to start seeing the transparency in social and governance, I think is that next big trend as well. And it's here now. It's not a new trend by any stretch of the imagination, but I think we're going to be sharing more of those metrics more and more. It's a little taboo to share some of the social stuff, right? But we kind of have to start doing that.
So what sort of tools are people utilizing in order to do that on the S and the G space? Colleen, do you have any things that you've seen your clients utilize to really help get their heads around it?
Yeah, in our industry, I mean, we're a fund administrator. We're specializing in impact investing, opportunity zones, EB5, and we found a need for those investments to have a impact focus. So we created on our platform to actually help measure the impact of funds, a tool for fund administrators to use, or fund managers to use, I should say. We start with a project location and build upon that using metrics that we've incorporated from a global impact, Howard Buffett's analytics to measure that impact, as well as economists to measure job creation, things of that nature. But it's a tool for those specialty funds to be able to use us to measure that impact and build upon that impact, but also to be able to use our portal to log in so their investors have the visibility, the transparency, the compliance. So it's a tool that we found it was a need for that with special fund administration, and it's growing as this impact is becoming more and more popular.
Yeah, absolutely. And for those of you that are targeting investors through your impact funds, do you see you're getting different investors? Do you see investors that are solely focused on impact, or are they looking at a breadth of different investments and seeking out investments in an impact as sort of a part of their investing strategy? I don't know, Jeremy,
For
do you
me,
want? Yeah, I was looking at you.
No, I think that's a great question. And as I was listening to the conversation here, I think my big takeaway from the conversation today is this is good for business. I'm in the fund management business. We've raised $300 million in a first-time fund. We're now in our second fund. But the reason that we've been as successful as we have been is because of the ESG. And it's interesting because when we started the fund, it was a little bit of a question mark for me. Like, my partner and I, co-founder and I, had been in impact investing, the bulk of our careers. We were always going to do it this way, but it was a little bit of a question, like, well, how does the market react to something like this, where you're just, non-apologetic, like intentional, like this is what we're going to do, double bottom line stuff. We thought that might turn people off, because I think there is a perception out there when you're talking about ESG, you're talking about impact, people think that entails a financial concession on the return side. And I think what we've been really, really pleasantly surprised to see is that, first of all, that's not true. We've been able to, both get, I think, competitive financial returns for our, investors alongside the measurable impact. But second of all, we've been really pleased and gratified to see that has resonated with the market. And I think most of our investors initially were self-identified impact investors. That was kind of our network, coming into this. And that was low-hanging fruit for us, and I think that really resonated with them. But we've been super excited to see, kind of more mainstream traditional investors, a lot of, household name, kind of smart money investors out there around the country who are like, wait, I can, both get the financial return that I'm having, but also feel really good about this neighborhood that I'm investing in, the low-income community that's going to benefit from this. Like, that to me is really, really exciting. And I think you're seeing this in the capital markets more broadly. You're seeing this kind of, wholesale shift to impact. And 10 years ago when I used to say that, I thought that was a little bit rhetorical and hyperbolic. And now I'm like, yeah, that is actually what's happening. The capital markets are shifting to impact. You saw Larry Fink a couple days ago say this is not some moon calf like wokeism type thing. This is like good for business. This is what the capital markets ought to be doing. So I think if folks out there are thinking about how should ESG fit into my strategy? I mean, my advice would be embrace it, lean into it, double down on it because it's been good to us. I think it's been good to other folks on the panel. I just want to make one real quick point, which is that it is tough to do a non-concessionary, create a non-concessionary investment product and still be impactful. And I want to be like totally transparent about that because you've got to be able to do both. And sometimes that involves innovation or other forms of soft financing or capital that can kind of bridge a gap. I think where we've been able to do that is just through, frankly, public and philanthropic subsidy and some innovative kind of programming, I think, with between us and our developer partners that are able to kind of bridge that gap effectively. But we've been able, across a $300 million set of funds, we've been able to bring in about $50 million of public subsidy down to the project level. That's not at the fund level, but down at the project level, tax rebates, government grants, tax increment financing and other things to help us drive more affordability, more impact, but also get those market rate, returns for investors. So I don't know if that's responsive.
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely right. I think on the impact side, as an impact fund, people are looking at potentially taking lower returns or bridging the gap to create those market level returns with some sort of public subsidy. I do think on the ESG side, it's sort of an all or nothing for a lot of investors. Like you have to have the ESG there in order for them even to come to the table. So in that side of it, I think we're seeing that it's really not a choice that you have to be doing these ESG. You have to have an ESG policy, you have to have these initiatives, and you have to actually be tracking and measuring them, at least it's been our experience, to actually be able to get those investors. Are other people taking lower returns in their impact funds, or are you guys offering market level returns?
I think impact enhances returns. I mean, not all the time, but we can all think about specific cases in commercial real estate where impact results in better returns, and at some point that becomes mainstream. So, for example, one of the things that we focus on in the impact fund is, it's mostly multifamily, affordable multifamily, and we focus on high quality resident services. And what we see is that when you support people in advancing in their lives, financial stability, housing stability, health and wellness, that they're better tenants, they stay longer, they have better job and income outcomes. And on the one hand, it's a cost. It's something that we actually put above the line in our property management budgets. But we see that the benefit is really dramatic. We had one property recently where the difference between before we added the we bought it recently, before we added the resident services, and afterwards, our retention rates went up 200 basis points. Right? People stay longer when they feel that sense of community and when they have some of the additional resources they need to be stable financially and in their lives.
And are you seeing that in collections as well for the
Absolutely.
financial performance of the asset?
Well, yeah, I mean, during COVID, I think all of us in the residential property sector that are in workforce housing especially saw that the ability to get rental assistance was critical to keeping arrears down when people lost their jobs. And that wasn't an easy system for individuals to navigate, and our resident services programs were really key in helping people navigate those application processes and get the money in and keep the arrears down at the properties.
Can I just give one other example
Yeah,
for the
please.
commercial? I think that's absolutely right on the residential side. On the commercial side, we have, just to take one kind of quick example, we have a project that's an adaptive reuse in Nashville, Tennessee, where we're trying to fill the commercial space with tenants, and we were approached by the local university there. This is in a low-income community, predominantly African-American community. The local university approached us and said, hey, we really want to do a business incubator targeting low-income African-American entrepreneurs and small business owners, and we'd love to kind of program into your space. That, to me, is the example, a good example of kind of the win-win, type opportunities that you sometimes get in impact investing, where that's a great credit grade tenant for us to have, long-term lease, market rate terms, but the impact that they're driving into that community through the built environment that we're investing in is off the charts. And that's just one of many, many examples. And I think if you're just being intentional and kind of innovative, those kind of opportunities are out there.
So for people that are kind of looking at ESG and thinking, okay, I do some things, but now what? How do I get my head around what the next steps are? How do I really build out this program? How do I continue to evolve in my program? What advice do you have for people? Lisa, do you want to start? I know you sort of built your company around this ESG impact mission.
We did. I mean, we were fortunate that way because we kind of started with ESG as the focus. But I would say putting a goal in place is really important. For us, some of you might have seen the Forbes article that ran last January where we committed to investing into $1 billion of opportunity zones in communities that really needed it. And we're happy to share that next month when a property that we're investing in Detroit closes, then we will have achieved that goal. So I would just say put a goal out there, even if it's sky high, and really focus and work to reach that goal.
I would say ESG needs to be the job of everyone in the company. So everyone in the company, no matter what their function is, needs to have a role and a specific target that they are going to achieve for ESG.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think, people sometimes hear ESG and they sort of are like the heavy sigh, like, that seems like a real pain. But it really has to permeate through the whole company because it touches every different department, every group. It's not just your ESG committee or your impact committee and your HR department. It really has to be ingrained in the culture of the firm in order for it to be successful. At least it's what we have found.
Just a quick thought on that. There are impact metric data banks out there that are publicly accessible. I think if you're a sponsor, if you're a developer, you could take a look at that across the ESG categories and just see from a data collections perspective, like from a systems perspective, like which of those metrics might you be able to actually have some data on, and then maybe think about starting there. I'm really happy to meet Michelle because I think it's fantastic that there are advisory, service providers that have sprung up around this because it can be tough to sort of, get involved in it. And I think having somebody like her to kind of be your Sherpa and, help you through it is a really smart way to do it too. But I think there's probably incremental ways to kind of ease yourself into it if this hasn't been your, whole career or whatever.
What tools are people using? How are they measuring? What other organizations are out there in the different spaces? Obviously, people, I think, probably know about GRESB and some other, but what are people using, and maybe what are you seeing among the other people in the industry?
Yeah, I joke there is an alphabet soup of acronyms that are out there. Okay, there's a lot. There's GRESB, TCFD, SASB, science-based targets. There's all these different acronyms that are out there. There's also different regulation requirements that are kind of forcing the issue a little bit, specifically in Europe. So there's the SFDR requirements, Sustainable Financial Disclosure requirements. That's another mouthful. I say all that to say there are tools out there, and I do think setting the appropriate goals, I think bringing in different stakeholders from within your organization and outside your organization, doing things like the materiality assessment to help navigate those waters will help you define which of those tools make the most sense for you. I do think having some type of solution to track that ongoing performance, but first it's just defining the metrics and what you want to align with. So you mentioned GRESB. I will take a quick second on that one. For those of you who aren't familiar with it, it's designed around real estate. It's a real estate sustainability benchmark. So that's a great one that we are fortunate to have within commercial real estate. But there's a multitude of others that are out there. So use those. They're great for communication. Stakeholders hear it. They understand it. Half this battle is just what and how and why do I communicate. So that's where I usually recommend starting is defining your goals, determining who's going to be engaged, which should be everyone, I agree, and deciding what to align with, because there's a lot out there.
I think this is a great question. So what are some cost-effective first steps that people can take in ESG? Like, what is that low-hanging fruit?
I think having been a part of small companies that are starting ESG initiatives, the first is just data. Like, what can you measure that relates to ESG? So start there, measure it, figure out how to collect it regularly, and then you kind of build from there. That doesn't necessarily cost you anything. Like, you don't have to have a fancy service provider. You can track it in a spreadsheet, and you can begin to see some patterns and set some goals and build from there.
An Energy Star Portfolio Manager is a free, I can't believe I'm saying this, it's a free tool. But it's a common tool. It's one you have to utilize to share your data for regulatory requirements, like the entire state of California. You have to upload 12 months of energy data every single year. That's a tool they use. It's not great for looking at like 100 properties. I don't suggest it, but it is a great free property level tool that can give you a place to store that data also.
Just real quick on this point, I think those are the right answers, but I would just offer a quick example. We invest in a lot of adaptive reuse projects, which are converting old industrial buildings into creative office or residential or whatever it is. And we read some research, scientific research, on the environmental benefits of adaptive reuse, because you're not shipping a bunch of stuff to a landfill and you're not sourcing a bunch of carbon-intensive raw materials to build a brand new building. And so we asked our developer partner to take a swag at understanding, the number of tons of landfill waste diverted, waste diverted from the landfill. And at first they were like, well, we can't figure that out. And then they sort of, eased through this process over the course of a month or so and got super creative, very defensible kind of calculations and analysis. And they came out with a number that's probably not the exact number of tons that were, not shipped to the landfill, but like a pretty good swag. And I think that's the kind of example of just sort of jumping into it. Like, look at a metric, see what you can get data on, and just go for it and see where it leads.
And then, Lisa Merage, I know you work with JTC, and you did engage a third-party provider to help you as you went through this process. How do you guys work together? What types of services did you seek outside of your organization?
So for us, we are working with JTC and utilizing their module to help us track as well, which becomes a little bit more kind of economic data, I would say. We kind of started by, just as Lisa's saying, we put things into buckets. What can we figure out? And we also worked with the Urban Institute, which was helpful. So we look at things like the number of accessible, high-quality jobs, if there's positive economic impact, if there are health, social services, cultural amenities like sporting arenas or museums, overall community wealth building, and like transportation and connectivity like Wi-Fi. And we kind of put them into those buckets. So those are low-hanging fruit, I guess.
And one of the things that we do at CityView is we track not only what we're doing, but we track what our money's doing. So as a developer, we look at who the providers that we are in business with are, what they're doing. Are we having diverse business owners, minority-owned service providers, and tracking that as well, so we see the impact of all of our dollars, not just within our own organization, but elsewhere. And that's been a great metric for us to be able to see the impact of some of those dollars. So I guess as we conclude in the last minute and a half, what's next in ESG? Where are you guys seeing trends going, and where can people be thinking about where they should be in 5 years if you can predict the future? I think Lisa, you brought up climate risk, and that's sort of the hot one right now, and people are really working to track that. Where do you see this going as far as the evolution of the industry?
That's a good pun. That's a hot one. I think when we make goals like net zero by 2050, that's an ESG goal. But in order to achieve that, we're going to have to do some very proactive environmental things. So in some ways, I feel like the trend is that ESG and impact are starting to converge, especially around environmental and climate issues. And I think we are going to see climate risk priced into asset values at some point in the not so far future, and we have to be ready for that.
Michelle, did you?
I think we're going to get into more metric-driven initiatives on the social side. I think we're going to get past the uncomfortableness of defining those, and I think the other piece that we have to kind of define within real estate specifically, I feel like private equity is a little bit easier when you're kind of talking with different operating partners that you might be working with to say, what are you doing as a company? But within real estate, I think we also just define what level of granularity we get to as it relates to some of those social metrics. But yeah, I completely agree. Carbon neutrality, we're throwing all these goals out there, but no one's really defined how we're going to get there. So keep that in mind if you throw it out there. But that's the other element I would throw in.
I think, so my forecast is right now, ESG impact, that's a competitive advantage. I think somebody mentioned that phrase earlier. I think 5 years from now, 10 years from now, you get penalized if you're not really smart on this. And and authentically kind of committed to it, like you have a real strategy around it, not just, buzzwords in your pitch deck or something like that, but like you actually know how to sort of interact with these concepts. So competitive advantage for right now, it's gonna be so mainstream in 10 years from now that you better have figured it out.
I think it's going to be sooner than 5 years. I think you're absolutely right, but I'm even hearing from clients now of it is a must for this capital. Like the investors will not invest unless you have this in place, and they're now scrambling. So I think you're 100% correct. But I think it's going to come sooner rather than later. COVID kind of pushed it forward, in my opinion. It took us from this to like this, because you're just seeing the actual financial impact by having good initiatives in place.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think 5 years ago, it was great to have a policy, and 3 years ago, if you put it on your website, people were thrilled, but they weren't actually tracking against it. And now, today, investors are a lot more focused on it, and the website policy is no longer enough.
Yeah, and from our perspective, it's prove it. Let's see it. Let's share it. Let's be transparent. We want to see the measures. Let's do it. Talk about it, but you got to do it.
Yeah.
Well, great. Thank you, guys. We've run out of time, but it was a great discussion. Really appreciate everyone's insight into the topic.
This is great.
Thank you.
Thank you.